Warrior trapped on modern-day Earth. Two friends with different destinies meet at a magical school. These are some of the stories we at Electric Lips Comics are working on. You can get your copies of both The Mana Chronicles and Tales of Itherel at elpmerch.com. Support independent creators. Explore the merch featuring exciting ELP Comics art with a wide range of designs. Electric Lips Comics. Imagination electrified.
Welcome, everyone, to another Conversations in the Void. I am your host, Graveyard, joined as always with my off-screen producer, Salem. Make sure to say hi to Salem. He likes to hear from each and every one of you. Now, I am pleased to announce our guest for tonight. He is writer, actor, and producer with works including Murder, She Wrote, Sliders, and, of course, Raised Eyebrows. Please welcome to the Void, the one and only Steve Stoliar. How you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing medium well, just like hamburgers.
Yeah.
And you?
Pretty good for a Sunday. You know, have to go back to the daily grind tomorrow, but can't complain besides that.
Okay.
So, Steve, thank you for coming on. And, before we get into the meat and potatoes of you and your work, I like to get to know you a little bit better. So what really brought you really into the world of entertainment and writing? Was there anything that you watched growing up, I want to do that?
I didn't really think I could make a living at it, and actually I'm still trying to figure that out. But I was always first of all, I adored the classic horror films. I grew up with all the Universals that were in syndication through MCA, and so I loved Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, Werewolf of London, Mummy, Invisible Man, Old Dark House. Just to name a few. Hold your applause till the end. And also loved comedy. Humor runs rampant in our family. And so I was always drawn to that and tended to have a flair for impressions and saying wordplay, that sort of thing. I was class clown in our 12th grade class at high school. And, and then I began to really focus on the Marx Brothers when I was starting high school. And I just adored, it was such a seamless blend of clever dialogue and physical comedy. It's like the Three Stooges is almost all physical comedy, and like the Ritz Brothers work a lot of music into their routines as opposed to separate solos like the Marx Brothers did. But with the Marx Brothers, you had people like George Kaufman and S.J. Perelman writing jokes for Groucho, and so I was really drawn to that. And of the Marx Brothers, my favorite was Groucho. I certainly loved Laurel and Hardy and still do, and I loved watching the Abbott and Costello show when I was a kid, and the Three Stooges shorts were on TV. And as a matter of fact, when I was born in St. Louis, and the Three Stooges came to town to promote one of those mediocre feature movies they were making. And since I was only 6 or 7, I didn't know that what I was watching on TV were short films from the 30s and 40s. So I didn't understand why they looked so old compared to how they looked on our Zenith black and white TV set. And I didn't know why Curly looked so different, because I didn't know from Joe DeRita. It was like Larry, Moe, and Curly. And then Larry said, or Moe said, "And this is Larry. He combs his hair with an egg beater." And Larry just had a few strands of hair slicked back. And even at my age, I was thinking, Moe, that's a good line, but it doesn't really work here because Larry's hair isn't frizzed out. So even then, I was paying attention to comedy teams and what works and all that. And through a fairly remarkable set of circumstances, when I was in college at UCLA in '74, I got to meet my hero, Groucho Marx, because I started a committee to put pressure on Universal Studios to re-release Animal Crackers, which hadn't been seen in decades, hadn't been syndicated on TV or in theaters because of a legal snag. And Groucho came to campus, and we sort of embarrassed Universal in front of all the news people and a crush of students. And Universal relented and cleared up the legal problem and struck a deal and struck fresh prints. And it ended up breaking the house record at the UA Westwood that the French Connection had set several years earlier. So it was very gratifying. And then I was rewarded with this astonishing plum dream job of working for Groucho in his home the last 3 years of his life, handling fan mail and also organizing all of his memorabilia for later donation to the Smithsonian. So I was just sort of wading ankle deep in annotated scripts and photos of the brothers out of makeup and letters and clippings from vaudeville. And since I was really essentially an obsessive fan, I knew all the stuff that I was looking through. It wasn't like, oh, if only I'd known that at the time, or I had to ask people I knew who all these people were from being such a Marx fan, reading the Groucho letters, so I knew his circle of friends, other writers, and all that. And the pull towards the entertainment world was so strong. I was particularly drawn to his old friends, the writers. Okay. And I felt very at home despite the age disparity. And at the time, I'd been a history major because I always loved history and archaeology and anthropology and paleontology. Although I wasn't sure what I was going to do with a degree in history, but I really didn't think the fact that I was quick and funny was enough that anything could be done with that. But it was such a strong pull that I shifted majors to motion picture television and got a degree in that, which of course doesn't entitle you to anything. No free tickets at the movies or anything like that. You just have this diploma, but you're on your own to hammer out a script or get your photo thrown away by 20-year-old office workers and different agencies and all that stuff. But that was really, it stemmed from being immersed in old movies as a kid and adolescent, and then really an obsessive Marx Brothers fan, and then finally meeting my hero and getting to know him, which was just, and consequently getting to meet Mae West and Bob Hope and George Burns and Jack Lemmon and Steve Allen and and a lot of the writers and directors from his films and You Bet Your Life TV show. George Fenneman was a great guy. So it was just a remarkable experience for me to go through when I was like 20. The downside was getting close to my hero as he's fading out, because he was in his 80s and had strokes and health problems, although there was still a lot of Groucho Marx left in him. And then this woman, Erin Fleming, who was this younger actress who had sort of finagled her way into his life and gradually took it over personally and professionally. And as he got older and hazier, he grew more dependent on her, and she alienated the friends and family. I mean, it's a classic, unfortunately, a common story about the younger woman that comes in and alienates the old guard and installs her own pals around the house. But so it was like I say, a real growing experience for me, but I wouldn't have traded it for anything, and it changed my life and still informs it. That's the short answer to whatever question you asked about 15 minutes ago. I don't even remember what it was, but I hope I answered it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a great way to get into writing, to get that that step into that world, especially meeting Groucho Marx and meeting all these other people. And so really, what was kind of your first thing that you wrote then?
Well,
that was able to get made?
He died in 1977, and then I got a job at Universal in the steno pool typing scripts from 11 in the morning to 8 at night, all day long. Rockford Files, Kojak, Columbo, Animal House, $6 Million Man, Bionic Woman. And I think there was something about the process of pushing all those scripts through a Selectric 2 typewriter, which was state of the art then. There were no word processors. Mm-hmm. But the idea that you could use liftoff tape instead of having to erase a mistake was a big deal in 1978. And I, as I got to read the scripts, I realized, you don't have to be Hemingway or, you don't have to be a fabulous writer to put something together that would work for an episode of a TV show. And then I became production secretary for a very nice, talented writer-producer named Bill Dial, who had worked on WKRP in Cincinnati. And he realized that I was cut out for bigger things than just getting his phone and making coffee and that sort of thing. And then in the meantime, I had become friends with talk show host Dick Cavett through my Groucho connection. Okay. And he took a sort of big brotherly interest in me. And in 1982, he was signed to do a series at HBO in New York called HBO Magazine, which was going to be like an Entertainment Tonight of what was coming up on the network with interviews and clips. And he told the producer to hire me to write it. And on the strength of his recommendation, I moved from LA to New York. The Mayflower movers could not figure out why anyone would move from Los Angeles to New York. As he said, they had moved any number of people from the East Coast to the West Coast. But I loved the whole Manhattan experience. I was there for 2.5 years, and it was just perfect for that point in my life. And I got to meet Cavett's friends and Woody Allen and Katharine Hepburn and Marshall Brickman, and working at HBO was great. Also, there was that feeling of I left LAX a production secretary and touched down at JFK as, quote, this writer from California that Dick Cavett wants. So nobody was questioning my credentials or lack thereof. Mm-hmm. But I hit my mark and I did fine. So it wasn't like, I was always afraid that a hand would clamp on my shoulder and say, we're very sorry, Sonny. We've made a horrible mistake. You're nothing but a secretary. It didn't happen. And then my friend and erstwhile employer, Bill Dial in California, offered me a job on a TV show he was working on as a staff writer. And that was just as my New York work was drying up. So I really very reluctantly moved back. I really wish things had worked out more consistently in New York rather than moving back to LA. And in fact, I had interviewed for a job on the Letterman show shortly before that offer came through. And I almost got it. It wasn't specifically a writer. It was someone to find funny things to make bits out of in different newspapers. And I met with Letterman and met with Barry Sand. This was back when it was Late Night with David Letterman, just in its early years. And they ended up not hiring someone and just expanding the duties of a staff person already. But for what it was worth, they said it would have been you if we decided it. So it's like, I don't know what I can do with that, but thanks. And then I got this offer to move back here. And so I started writing for episodic TV and did episodes of different shows. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, people had said, you should write a book about your Groucho experiences. And I thought, well, look, I came in at the tail end of this man's amazing life and career. How could I do a whole book about like this postscript to him? But then I started thinking, well, maybe if I gather together some of the best stories, maybe I could have like Esquire or Vanity Fair or something about, my days at Groucho's house.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat down to try to recreate the chronology of everything from being a fan to meeting him to getting the job and all of that. And I found that I was on like page 20 and hadn't met him yet. And I remember thinking, this is going to be longer than an article. But then I started worrying, which is one of my great talents. I started worrying that it would be too long for an article and too short for a book, that I would end up with this like pamphlet or something. And I thought, I can't possibly fill 300 pages with, but I carefully put together, it really appealed to the archaeologist in me, because I was going through old copies of letters I had sent friends while I was working for Groucho, newspaper clippings of things that happened while I was there, and I'm in some of the clippings and photos, and lo and behold, after a certain number of rejection slips, it was published. Dick Cavett did the introduction. Woody Allen said it was one of the best books about a show business icon he'd ever read. And Jack Lemmon and Steve Allen gave Dust Jacket blurbs. I loved just reading the back of the book, because all these famous people that I brushed shoulders with back then, saying they liked the book and did it justice, and that's in a nutshell. Me.
So
I've also done voice work.
Yeah.
For animation and for radio, and I like doing impressions of obscure character actors, and I'm very partial to the classic horror,
like Rondo Hatton. You're my friend. Don't hurt the girl. I want to eat some meat.
Or John Carradine.
I was in all those John Ford pictures, Grapes of Wrath and so on, but all anybody wants to know about is when I play Dracula.
Before we got on the air, I promised you 2 bona fide first-hand horror stories. One of them was when I was working at Universal in the steno pool. I was working late one night, and it was, of course, a dark and stormy night. Although most nights are dark, come to think of it. And I had to take a script or file or something like that from one building to another that involved my walking past the main gate, where Scotty, who had been there forever, would wave people through. Now it's a big deal of security, but back then you just would wave at Scotty. So I started to cross the little island where the guard box was, and all of a sudden these tires screech, and I'm flooded with headlight lights, and I look, and glowering at me through the windshield wipers was Christopher Lee, just staring daggers at me. I think he was probably shooting 1941, the Spielberg comedy. But it was, it sounds like I'm either making it up or exaggerating, and it wasn't really raining, or he wasn't really angry. It happened exactly like that. I had a similar occurrence some years earlier when I was just like 10 or 11, but still subscribed to Famous Monsters of Filmland and loved everything about the classic horror films. And my parents and I were down at a place that isn't there anymore called Ports a Call, which was along the waterfront in LA or San Pedro. And there were shops and so on. And it was foggy. And there was a little pier that people that had boats could walk down the pier and then get onto their boats. And so I was just standing where the pier meets the land and looking out into the fog. And from out of the fog, silhouetted, wearing a captain's hat, John Carradine looked at me and continued walking past me. But from out of fog, not a fog machine, not rear projection, not CGI, but legitimate fog. He suddenly appeared unmistakably.
Mr. John Kennedy. He
used to do commercials for some savings and loans saying,
I used to have a lot of assets. I had a 65-foot schooner, but no more because I didn't manage my money.
So I guess he had just come from his 65-foot schooner. But those are my brushes with the greats of the class. I never met Karloff or Lugosi or Cheney. But,
yeah.
But I did actually, when I was a secretary at Universal, there was a guy who was brought him in to direct a TV movie, and he had been the production designer at Corman for all of the Daniel Haller. You see his name go by at the end of it. And he was there for all of those Vincent Price, Edgar Allan Poe, House of Usher things. He said at the end of House of Usher, when you see the roof in flames, and it kind of looks like a giant shredded wheat flaming, and he said, and they use that. He said, we set fire to a chicken coop. That was the best we could find, was a chicken coop. And he said, man, we use that at the end. Every time some building was in flames,
yep,
there comes the chicken coop. And he also told me he said he and his wife were out for the evening, and they had a babysitter look after their kids, and they came back from their dinner or whatever it was and said, were there any calls while we were out? And the babysitter said, well, I don't know if I should even tell you this, but okay. The phone rang, and this guy said, this is Boris Karloff. I didn't get my call sheet for tomorrow. I don't know what time to show up. And I think it was my friend Tom. I'm not sure. And then like 10 minutes later, the phone rang, and this guy said, this is Peter Lorre. And I didn't get and so I don't know who, and Dan was turning pale, realizing he had forgotten to give the actors their call times and each of those calls from Rathbone and Cheney and Carl, they were all legitimate. And she was basically going, stop already, please, I'm busy here. You're bothering me. You shouldn't be calling me. Anyway, I think that's the sum total of my classic horror stuff.
Yeah.
And then moving into more recent years, we are intending to do a movie version of Raised Eyebrows, and we have Jeffrey Rush to play the old Groucho, and he can't wait to play it.
Oh, man.
And he said the best part of the fact that it's taking so long to put the elements together is that the longer it takes, the less makeup he'll need. So, but the director originally attached to it was Rob Zombie, which might seem like a really strange way to go. But he completely separate from my knowledge, he had found my book, read it, and in an interview for a magazine, when they said, what's your favorite this, what's your favorite this, they said, what's your favorite book? And he said, Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House, by this kid that got to work for. And it was like, oh my God, this guy that makes these horror movies knows about me and thinks that much of my book. So we got in touch through someone said, I know someone who knows someone that was a guitarist. And fine. And Rob said, he said, have you thought of making a movie? And I said, yes, I have a script. And he said, this is exactly the kind of thing. Oh, you're welcome, Ian, for ordering my book all the way in Canada. And I'm sorry postage costs so damn much for Canada as if you also lived in Switzerland or something. But I have no control over that. And there's no reason I should lose money on my books. But so, well, an unsolicited testimonial. So before I forget, the book is on Amazon and also in Kindle and audiobook with me doing all the readings. But if someone would like to get a signed or personalized copy of Raised Eyebrows, they can go to my website at Steve Stoliar, STOLIAR.com. and order it there, and I'll be happy to. Anyway, so Rob said this is exactly the kind of movie I'm looking for to get away from horror, because he sort of stumbled into it. It wasn't like, if I ever have a chance, I'm going to make a horror movie. He also loved classic horror, and we used to talk about all of the B. Lugosi films, like the Devil Bat, Monogram and PRC. That never mind that Dracula is fine, and the Raven and all that. But what about the really tacky things he did? And we really had a great working relationship. He wasn't trying to turn it into a Rob Zombie movie. That was, of course, what people naturally assume, because you get typecast by what you've done. And I even wrote an op-ed article for the Hollywood Reporter about all of the mainstream directors who started out in horror, all the people that Corman got going, Coppola and James Cameron and all these people. And I ended up mentioning Robert Wise, who started out directing Curse of the Cat People and ended up with Sound of Music and West Side Story, basically pleading with people to give him a chance. I think ultimately the reason it couldn't get past a certain point was too many people couldn't get past. It's like, I just don't know that that's where we want to support this with him. So it's it's too bad, and we didn't part on bad terms. And I actually loved his shows. I mean, he would get me, a friend and I would get to go, and I loved just the experience of it. Star Trek the Motion Picture, says Ian. I had nothing to do with Star Trek the Motion Picture.
I think Robert Wise, maybe.
Oh, thank you. Yes. But I'll tell you this, when I was 14, I'm at the age now where mentioning a name or a title or a year invariably leads to a story. Not necessarily an interesting one, but anyway, my mom took me to lunch at a restaurant called Nicodell's, which was directly across the street from Paramount. And sitting at another table were DeForest Kelley and Leonard Nimoy in their full McCoy Spock costume and makeup, because it was just a break in the shooting of an episode in '68. And they were having lunch with Greg Morris, the black guy from Mission Impossible, because those were both Paramount things. And of course, it's like, well, you're on another show, you can't eat with us. So they were all friends. But yes, there were Spock and McCoy having, salads with their velour tops and pointy ears and all that. So there's my Star Trek story.
Yes.
And also, my late wife and I were at a restaurant, and William Shatner was there. And she said, I just realized his name is an anagram for Shitwell Airman. And one of 1,000 reasons why I love and miss having my wife around. Were we talking about anything? Rob Zombie. So anyway, I did get a kick out of his shows, and we'll never know how it would have turned out. I mean, it's possible that it might not have worked, but as I say, none of his notes for the script were like, "Oh no, this is nothing like what it's supposed to be." So I think he deserved a chance at a non-horror thing, but the people with money just want to see him do the same variations on a theme. So
So Steve, I gotta know though, with the pre-production for Raised Eyebrows and casting yourself, essentially, are you part of that process, and what's that like?
I've been very fortunate that the new director and co-writer is a man named Oren Moverman, who was nominated for an Oscar for writing The Messenger, which was a Woody Harrelson film where he's an Iraq war guy that has to drive around and inform families that their loved ones were killed overseas. But he co-wrote the Brian Wilson biopic. And I've been very fortunate, but he and I are also on the same page, because I was afraid oh, all right, the production company is going to bring someone new and they're going to say, thank you. Bink! You gave us the book. We'll take it from here. We'll invite you to the premiere. And instead, Oren has been very respectful because even though I've done a bunch of TV, I don't have any clout in the world of features, and people don't like taking a chance. They're very risk averse. And it would have been easy for him to just kind of kick sand in my face. And I thought, oh, so I guess it's going to end up having to go through arbitration with the Writers Guild, and he'll have all the. And instead, he said to me, by the way, I consider us 50-50 partners on the script. He's that rare breed of egoless director. He's not looking to wrest every decision, and So I don't have control, but they do more than just go, yeah, thanks. And that's a good idea. No, it's a good idea. They don't do that. They actually listen. And they're thinking similarly. They're not thinking, hey, but how about if we make Groucho a woman and it takes place on Neptune or something? Right. So I am, involved in a sort of advisory, and Oren looks forward to having me on the set, which is another thing that writers are usually not at all welcome, because the director's afraid of some prima donna saying, oh no, but this took place in the den, not the dining room. You've destroyed the sanctity of my work. But my input has been creative and not ego. It was always, we're both thinking what is for the benefit of the film, not each other. And so, we've, he's got his own director of photography that has done his other films. And we've got the script broken down into shooting days and all. And it's like we're just hunting after sufficient financing, even though it's not a big ticket item. It's very tough these days after COVID and the strikes and streaming services overextending themselves by buying up a lot of stuff and then getting 12 subscribers. So it's even harder than usual to try to get an independent film financed, but I've got really well-connected people passionately focused on making it happen. So no guarantees, but it will be positively surreal to walk onto the set of a film based on a part of my life that I lived and wrote a book about, and seeing people playing people I knew. It's whatever meta is, it's that.
Well, and yourself. You're going to see yourself.
I will see myself. Yes. Charlie Plummer was attached to it to play me, but Oren said by this time he may have aged himself out of the role. So it may not be Charlie, but tentatively. And then Sienna Miller is Aaron Fleming, the mercurial younger woman in his life. So yes, it will be very strange seeing me with my mutton chops and of course back then they were made of real mutton, none of this and mustache and a full head of hair, meeting these people based on my book. And I believe there will be a cameo of some sort for me, and that'll be wild to be interacting possibly with my younger self, which will, I think, send me back into therapy. I met my younger self. My inner child became my outer child in Technicolor. So.
All right, and I also got to ask, because I'm remiss if I didn't ask this question, about you did a couple episodes for the TV show Sliders.
I did this many.
Yes. Now, were you a fan of Sliders before writing for it, or did you watch anything before it? What was that like to get into it?
In the world of freelance TV writing, you're put up for things and you throw some ideas together and you pitch them, and if one of them intrigues them, then you flesh it out into an outline and all that. In this case, I hadn't been watching the show. But it was being produced by Bill Dial and Richard Chapman, who I knew well from my Universal days.
Mm-hmm.
And so they let me come in and I pitched stories, and I ended up doing one each season for 3 seasons. And it was in television is like a producer networks medium as opposed to the writer or film is like a director's medium and the theater's writer. So each season, the network decided on a different kind of flavor. And one season, they wanted the shows to be based on pre-existing sci-fi films, just like variations on Volcano and Dune and things like that. And which was held against us, because then people would see it and they go, this is just a ripoff of Dune. And it's like, well, when they say we're hiring you to do something based on Dune, and then you do it. And so as a result of that, now I'm blanking on his name, but I got this far without blanking on his name. Who is the heavyset bearded guy that was in the Indiana Jones movies that was on Sliders? The British guy?
John Rhys Darby.
Yes.
Yeah.
John Rice Krispies.
Yes.
I did that thing you're not supposed to do. I Googled my name to see what was on the information superhighway. Mm-hmm. And I run across an old interview with John Rhys Davies where they said, and what are you going to be doing next? And he said, murdering Steve Stoliar. And they spelled my name right, which it's like, oh, this finally you spell it right and it's for that. And it turns out that he didn't like that script because it was like a ripoff of a pre-existing sci-fi film, which was The Assignment. And he sort of should have known that freelance writers don't come in and change the premise of the show. I mean, it's out of my hands when you're a hired gun for something. But they happened to catch him as he was wrapping up filming that episode that I wrote. And he was plus it was so rewritten by the staff, there was almost nothing left from what I turned in, which is another frequent occurrence in television, is that what you think is your last draft is just them, okay, now we can finally get to work. So as I recall, he did not murder me, but it you have no control over what pops up on the information superhighway. So
yeah, like I said, I just wondered because I really enjoyed Sliders when it
was an interesting, fun show. I did another one about onliners and offliners because it was back when I was resistant to getting a computer, and I took it out on as press. It was sort of like a Romeo and Juliet, where the offliners were like street people that nothing was electric or electronic, and the onliners lived in towers of like condos. Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm glad you're fascinated, Ian. Now we know at least one person is out there and great beyond.
So before we get into wrap-up questions, I have a really important question here. Is you grew up on the Three Stooges, the Marx Brothers, stuff like that. I did too, and here we are still discussing them. And I still think they're pop culture icons. Why do you think that's been the case for so many years?
It's interesting that you bring that up because, when I start to explain about how a lot of like Gen X and younger can't place the name Groucho and all. And I've gotten way past saying, you should know that, or how can you not know that? It's like I accept, because there's so much content, and to ask people to watch black and white and references to things that were current in 1933. But I also hasten to add when I explain it that I wasn't seeing them first run either. I wasn't standing in line during the Great Depression to pay 15 cents to see Duck Soup. I saw them on TV, but there was a lot less to choose from. Even in LA, there was ABC, CBS, NBC, then Channel 5, 11, and 9, and 13 were local, and then there was the PBS was the educational channel. That's what it was called. And that was it. And most things went off the air at like 1 a.m. and you just got a test pattern. And so you didn't have all these things to choose from. But yeah, lots of people grew up with those comedy teams, and even though they had nothing to do with being contemporary. I don't know. I get very frustrated by political correctness because it's like I saw someone had written an article about monkey business, and it was like a young person, and she was talking about how funny it was after all these years. And I thought, all right, this is encouraging as I reach closer to the end than the beginning to see that young people. And then towards the end, she said, however, did anyone ever think it was funny to see Harpo Marx chasing girls all over the set? Well, the correct answer to that is yes, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people over the years. But she was coming at it from isn't this harassment? Doesn't no mean no? The sort of people that would ban Pepe Le Pew for constantly being on the make with that poor cat. So this is date rape, for heaven's sakes. You're advocating date rape, and we can't. So the whole thing about, why does Harpo have to, or they'll watch You Bet Your Life, and they'll say, why does Groucho have to wiggle his eyebrows when a female contestant is in a tight sweater? Or why does he have to talk about her shape? That's so demeaning. And it's like, I can't handle retroactive political correctness. You can't say, because it's currently out of favor, they should have known that in 1932. I end up having the same thing talking about blackface, which used to be so common. And if you cancel all the people who did blackface, you would be canceling the Marx Brothers and Judy Garland and Fred Astaire and Mickey Rooney and any number of, it was such a common part of show business and vaudeville and burlesque and all that. But I'll talk to people who will say, well, they should have refused to do it because it was demeaning. They should have just said, I'm not going to do that production number. And it doesn't work to just project yourself 85 years ago and say that you should have stuck up for them before anyone knew it was offensive. Yeah. So funny is still funny. I think the Three Stooges have a lower common denominator because it's such broad physical comedy. Drawing a saw over Curly's head is not exactly, satire. But and then as you get older, it stays funny because you're thinking those are grown men doing that. And then it becomes, you end up watching them again because it reminds you of seeing them when you were a kid. Laurel and Hardy still make me laugh. Again, another blend of character and physical. Sadly, the Marx Brothers only made 12 or 13 movies. They didn't make a bunch of shorts that were in constant syndication. All they made were that handful. And because I'm such a snob, I only think about half are really good and watchable more than once. And they tend to be the earlier ones, Monkey Business, Horse Feathers, Ducks. And the later ones get bogged down in plot and romance and production numbers. So there isn't as much of them, but Abbott and Costello, their show remained in syndication, and they had a pretty healthy run of Universal features. I didn't really appreciate Martin and Lewis as a team till I saw kinescopes of the Colgate Comedy Hour, which were live. Because I'd seen some of the features, and as with the Marx Brothers, I felt they kind of got bogged down with bad guys and romance and singing. And people would say, "Oh, but if you had only seen Martin and Lewis in their live in a nightclub, they were great." And I finally had access to all of the Colgate shows they did, And I got to see what all the fuss was about, because of all the stuff that was on spur of the moment and strayed from the script, and it was genuinely funny. But it was hard for me to get that until I got away from the features and only on the live TV stuff.
Awesome. All right, Steve. So let's get into these wrap-up questions.
This won't take long because I won't know them.
Do you have any advice for anyone getting into the field that you do, writing, producing?
Yes,
acting?
Don't take anyone's advice, including mine, because you can't know what thing is going to work for you or not work for you. So to say, this is what I did, far be it from me to say, therefore, that's what you should do. However, if your interest is in writing, this may seem obvious, but it's something that a lot of people resist. You must at some point write something down that you can leave with someone to read without a mealy-mouthed explanation and follow-up and afterwards explaining questions. It has to be something that when they sit back with a cup of coffee and start scrolling through it, holds their interest and stands on its own. So if it's for television, your best bet is to, if you're really crazy about a certain show, you could write an episode of that show, but don't turn it into that show, because their seismographs are much more sensitive because they live and breathe those characters. So, for instance, way back when, if you wrote a spec Cheers, you would send that to Taxi, because if you send it to Cheers, the staff would say, he doesn't really know how Coach and Diane talk or whatever. Connections, if you know anyone who has anything to do with any aspect of working in the motion picture or entertainment industry, ask what connections they've made or what they would suggest or something. So it's a kind of lonely thing that ends up being dependent on other people. You can't just act in your living room. You can write stuff, but you can write a book and have it published by a publisher or self-published. But in terms of the business, sending jokes to comedians, sending scripts to TV shows, or finding out if someone's cousin, is a set painter at Sony, you never know.
Right. All right. So Steve, with all the work that you've done and the documentaries and research you've done for people such as the Three Stooges, like that, is there any plans or future ones that you'd like to do that you want to tackle?
No, it's interesting. As a writer, I'm not really compelled to always be writing or working on a documentary or something like that. I feel much more like a gun for hire, unless it's like based on a book I wrote or personal experiences or something. It isn't like I simply must get these ideas down, or I would just love to really delve into this. But I always appreciate what others have done. I'm good friends with Bob Whitey, who a lot of people know as the creative force behind some of the best Curb Your Enthusiasm episodes. It says directed by Robert B. Whitey, which apparently they now have T-shirts, much to his amusement, that say that. But he also had done great documentaries on the Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields and Woody Allen and Dick Gregory and Mort Sahl. And I love watching his stuff. He'll let me see rough cuts and I'll give him feedback on it, and that's cool. Nice. But I have no problem with other people doing a fine job. So, basically I'm lazy unless someone throws money at me and says, type Schweinhund.
All right. So see, with all your love of the classic Universal monster movies, stuff like that, which one is, do you think, the ultimate one? Which one's the best one in your opinion?
I'm very partial to Bride of Frankenstein, and I think it's one of the rare sequels that's superior to the initial one. You know, usually with a sequel, it's like they do a great job, and then they try to Xerox it, and it gets fainter with each son of, house of, and all that.
Right.
But in the case of Bride of Frankenstein, I think it's so rich. I mean, the monster talking, the blind man, the fact that and Dr. Pretorius forcing Colin Cloud, leave it alone. I must be left alone. Sit down, you fool. To create a woman. And then you get Elsa Lanchester also at the beginning as Mary Shelley sitting around with Lord Byron. And there's such, there's James Whale's macabre humor running all through it, even as there's, some genuinely frightening things. Una O'Connor reaching in to have her husband come out of the burnt windmill, but it's the monster grabbing onto her arm.
Right.
But it's hard for me to be objective because it's such a part of the fabric of my childhood. Between seeing them on TV and Famous Monsters of Filmland and just devouring all those photos, and there was no Google image. It's like, wow, a magazine that's filled with photos and interviews with the people that were still around then.
So are you interested in seeing Guillermo del Toro's The Bride, which is going to be a remake then of Bride of Frankenstein?
I would check it out. I'm not a snob about remakes. Hollywood's been remaking. You can see the 1931 Jekyll and Hyde with Frederick March, or the 41 Jekyll and Hyde with Spencer Tracy, and I think they're both splendid films. They didn't like, oh, why did you have to ruin this great movie? Let's see. I usually weird people out by saying I prefer the remake of Maltese Falcon to the original, because then they'll say, wait a minute, they remade Bogart, did it? And I say, no, that was the remake. It was a remake of a 1931 film with Ricardo Cortez and Thelma Todd and Dwight Fry as Wilmer, the role that Alicia Cook Jr. played in the 41. So, Warner Brothers made a movie called The Life of Jimmy Dolan in like 33 with Douglas Fairbanks Jr. as a fighter who's falsely accused of murder. And they remade it just 6 years later as They Made Me a Criminal with John Garfield as the fighter falsely accused. And it's much better than the 33 version. So I'm not, also, I thought that Nightmare Alley, which I love the original of with Tyrone Power and, the fake mentalist and the geeks and all that, I thought the remake could stand right alongside it. I'm not one of those white, but John Huston used to say, don't remake the good films, remake the bad ones and fix what was wrong. But sometimes they do remake the good ones, but it isn't always necessarily an insult to the classics. So there's room for flexibility.
All right, Steve, here for your random horror trivia question.
Oh, am I supposed to ask it or answer?
Oh, I'll ask you. All right. Okay. So this is for you, Steve. So this horror genre, referring to pulp novels meaning yellow in Italian, features films produced in Italy in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Do you know what that style is called? So like Fulci.
Well, it's not Grand Guignol. Yellow is jaune in French, from which we get jaundice. I'm trying to think of an Italian. I don't know Italian, but I bet it's close to French, but I can't think of it. I hope I've heard of it. It doesn't do any good. Someone sent me a picture of an actress and said, look what she looks like now. And it's like, I just can't imagine. And then he told me who it was, and I said, I wouldn't have known who that was in her heyday.
So
what is it?
This Giallo.
See,
it's like Fulci and Dario Argento, their style of
I know
movies.
Argento. Well,
Yeah.
see, I wouldn't. It isn't one of those. Oh yeah, I was going to say that. It's total. You could have told me anything, and I would have gone. Oh, okay. Oh well.
Yeah, it's all good fun. So
Do I
before
still get lovely parting gifts?
Oh, you do.
An
So see,
Amazon
before-
gift card. All right.
Exactly. So before we sign off, where can people find you, follow you, and just learn as the progress of Raised Eyebrows comes to be?
They can check out my aforementioned website, Steve Stoliar. Let me see, STOLIAR, like it says there, .com, and to either see the latest posting of what I've been up to, like podcasts or news stories or arrests, and or if they go to the shop page, they can order a copy of Raised Eyebrows, and I'll be happy to personalize it and get it to you. That's the best I can do.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Steve, for coming on. As always, I've been Graveyard. Follow us on all social media at PodOutatNight. And thank you again, and we'll see you next time. And don't get lost in the void. Good night.